Today we keep the commemoration of St. Aloysius Gonzaga, a beautiful feast, a beautiful individual who was one of the great shining lights of the early part of the 16th century. He dies at the age of 23, I believe it was, as a Jesuit student. But his life is a very exciting life in the sense that he was born with a title. His father was the Marquis in the southern part of Italy. He grew up in tremendous privilege. He had already, as a young child, anything you could possibly want. And yet, even as a small boy, he had a distaste for worldly things. He preferred to pray. He preferred to go to the chapel, to be in church. He preferred to have religious images in his room rather than all of the delightful things that little kids would like to have. And he would have none of it. And as a young boy, at the age of 9, he consecrates himself entirely in his virginity to the Immaculate Mother of God. As a young man, Aloysius has a desire to enter into religious life, having been told by the Holy Virgin Mary that he would find himself on the way of perfection should he enter the Jesuits. And so this is the day when the Jesuits were truly Jesuits, and they were inflamed with holiness and with missionary zeal. And so he has this desire. His father, of course, refuses. The mother is very much encouraging her son to pursue this vocation, but the father takes at least another 2 years before he eventually will give in. Part of the reason was that Aloysius was the firstborn son, and so the title and all of the inheritance would go to him. And so Aloysius comes up with a plan. He says to his father, even if I should inherit all these things, I'll be a terrible administrator, you know that. And so he says, what if I were to renounce everything and do it in a formal document in favor of my younger brother? This seemed very pleasing to the father. And so in a very dramatic type of action, he signs away his entire patrimony, his entire inheritance, the title, and everything that goes with it. He does this as if you were throwing out the trash. He had no more regard for it than anything else that you could possibly just throw away in a refuge bin. Of course, there were those anxious to dive in to get anything that may have been left at the bottom of the can. But for Aloysius, it was just so much rubbish. He enters the Jesuits, and in a very beautiful gesture, the story goes, there's a coronet that goes with the title. He takes the coronet and also the ceremonial sword, and he lays them on the altar of Our Lady, and he surrenders all of this symbolically as a symbol of his total subjection, total submission to be obedient to Christ and to the Holy Mother of God. He enters the Jesuits, and almost immediately, as a postulant and as a novice, he begins to shine with virtue, so much so that all of the fathers begin to look to him with great admiration. He's asked to be counsel to many people, many priests seek his advice. And so he continues to grow in great holiness and great favor with God. The story is told that he had a very dear friend who was an older man in the Jesuit order. The man was at the point of dying, and he asked Aloysius to pray for him. Aloysius knew this man to be a very holy and a very pious man, as was the custom when a priest is dying. All the other members of the community will come into the room, as many as they could, and they will kneel down and offer the customary prayers for the dead, and they'll hold a lighted candle. And the moment the man is pronounced dead, they will blow out their candles. However, when they all rise after having blown out their candle, Aloysius is still there with his candle still burning, deep wrapped in prayer. One of them tried to shake him, but in shaking him, they realize that he's in a state of ecstasy, and so they leave him alone. Aloysius will be that way for almost an hour. After the hour is passed, Aloysius will come out of all this, and he'll blow out his candle. And he's very shaken by what had just happened to him. He was asked what had happened during this time of prayer, and Aloysius said that when Father died, he asked me if I would accompany him to purgatory. And he said he was there for an hour, and it seemed like an eternity. And Aloysius said after that hour, he was admitted into the kingdom of heaven, having been so purified in his body and soul that he was admitted into heaven. This, of course, made Aloysius even all the more fervent in seeking to live a good and holy life, not only practicing all the observances of the rule of the Jesuits, but also maintaining his busy schedule of studies, because now he's in the theologate, preparing for priesthood, all the studies that go with it, doing his daily jobs and daily work, helping any brother that needed help. But then something happens in the city of Rome. There's an outbreak of a very bad fever. All of the Jesuits leave, except those who volunteer to stay to help deal with the sick. Again, anyone with means got out of the city, so the ones that were left were the poorest of the people. Aloysius volunteers to stay and to work among the poor, ministering in the public hospitals, he along with several other Jesuits. And of course, we can imagine what happens. He contracts the fever, becomes very, very sick, almost to the point of death. He makes a recovery, he's able to do a little bit more work, but then with a vengeance, the fever comes back. And after a short illness, Aloysius yields his soul to God. And so we look to this man who now in heaven prays for us and intercedes for us. Pius XII would name him the patron saint of all students, but particularly of seminarians. And so it was always the custom, certainly it was when I was in the seminary, that we were not allowed to leave for the summer until the feast of St. Aloysius. And so when we offered the Mass in the morning in honor of our patron, then we were allowed to leave for our summer holiday. And so we consider the holiness of this man who lived and died, whether he was in wealth or in great poverty, lived and died for the glory of God. And a man who, in his early youth, had all of the luxury of the wealth, of the wealthy and the powerful, and yet as a Jesuit lived a most simple life. He even had permission to take a room, not in the regular dormitories because they were full, there was no room. And so Aloysius came up with an idea. He said, there's a little cabinet, a little closet underneath the great stairway in the Jesuit house. He said, can I live under there and have that as my cell? The superior said, well, you're going to be tortured all day long, and even at night when the fathers have to come up and down the steps, they're going to wake you. Aloysius said, I could be just fine. And so he offered that as a penance for the several years he lived in the novitiate, in the seminary, offering this penance up, living under the steps with fathers coming up and down all day and into the evening. And so we pray that God, through his intercession, strengthen us to live, whether in blessing or in times of need, always to live closely united to Christ. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost.